Welcome to Running Up the Score. I am Alex Kennedy. This is my show that airs every Tuesday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. For those of you guys that watch this show, you know I am based just outside of Orlando, home of maybe the hottest team in the NBA right now and maybe the coolest storyline in the NBA. So I had to rep the Magic today, wear the Paolo Franz NBA Jam shirt, and talk some Magic. And who better to join me to talk about this Orlando Magic team than my buddy, Philip Rossman-Reich, who is the Orlando Magic Daily site editor and the host of the Locked On Magic podcast. This team's been so much fun. Philip, how are you?
I am doing good. It's nice to have a team that's winning games. That's been strange for the last decade or so.
You and I were at the game, the win over Boston, and there have been a few games this year where like the energy in the building is just different. And you and I kind of look at each other and we're like, man, it kind of feels like back at that finals team with Dwight, Richard, Hito. You know, it's for the first time in a while, these fans who have been super loyal and haven't really had a whole lot to cheer for, they're very pumped. And you can tell that this is kind of a different, it's a special atmosphere in that building. What are your thoughts on kind of just the vibe around this team, not only in the locker room, but also just like among the fan base?
Yeah, I mean, obviously for the fans, it's been a long time coming, and I remember back in 2019 when the Magic had the 22-9 kick to finish seventh in the East, and there was a 5-game homestand there that the Magic swept through. They won all 5 games, a big part of how they made the playoffs that year. And Steve Clifford said, I think after one of those games, like that energy in the building, that's what this fan base can do. And when you think about it, guys like Nikola Vucevic, who had been there for 6-7 years, Evan Fournier, who'd been there for 5-6 years, Aaron Gordon, those guys, they had never really felt that. And I would honestly say, like, as much energy as there was in the building for those teams, it feels double for this team. There is, as much as, I know we're going to talk about Jamal Mosley here, as much as there's a lot of this buy-in to what Jamal Mosley's teaching from the players, there's just as much buy-in from the fans. Like, everyone can feel that there's something here. Like, do we know exactly what it is? Do we know what its ceiling is yet? No, probably not. But there's something here to get excited about. And last year, I think we could chalk some of it up, whatever energy there was, a little bit up to the curiosity of having the first overall pick. And the Magic did really well, especially for how much that team had struggled historically and how much that team was struggling, especially early in the season. Everyone, I think, that went to the games, especially as the season went on, saw that, there's something here. And I've just been kind of thinking about it a little bit. There really is nothing more exciting than a team that is just discovering its potential, or is just starting to turn potential energy into kinetic energy, to use some science terms. Like, this team isn't just, they're going to be good a few years down the road. It's, they're good now, and they probably don't realize how good they are or how good they can be. And so it's just all vibes and all fun right now. And you can feel it every time you step into the Amway Center.
Yeah, it's not just potential. It's also, wow, we're the second seed in the Eastern Conference, and there's just tons of hope. And then also, you just have these personalities on this team too. Like when Jalen Suggs and Nikola Jokic got into that scuffle, and then they beat Denver. I mean, the building erupted. Like people like Cole Anthony that just get the fans fired up with some of their big shots, and then yelling at the crowd and stuff like that. It's a really cool, fun team. Even Cole and Jalen kind of connecting for that Dwayne Wade, LeBron James recreation dunk. Like, it's not just a really talented young team. It's a really fun, electrifying, energetic team. So I think it's a great time to be a Magic fan. Right now, they've won 9 of 10 games. One thing I've been hearing a lot and seeing on Twitter is, can they sustain this? Is it a fluke? But I think what people don't realize is this team, once they got healthy last season, they had some really key wins. They beat the Celtics multiple times. They beat the Nuggets. There were a lot of these teams that were top teams in both conferences that they were knocking down last year. Even the year before, they beat the Warriors. I think Steph Curry was out that game, but they've had big wins and they've shown potential.
Golden State hasn't won at the Amway Center since 2018. They beat good teams.
That's the thing. They've been beating good teams for a while. And then if you look at the second half of last year, they looked like a really good team. So I don't think that people who maybe are just tuning in for the first time, they're thinking, okay, it's been a couple games, but this seems like a continuation of what we saw last year and kind of building off of last year. Can you kind of speak to that and why you think maybe they can sustain this success?
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of forget that the Magic flew just very under the radar last year. They started the year 5-20. They had injuries to all their guards. Markelle Fultz, Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony were all out for a good chunk of those first 25 games. But after that 5-20 start, they went 29-28. So that's nearly 3/4 of the season, 57 games, where they were playing 500 basketball. And, that obviously is a small goal, but for a team that won 22 games the year before, for a team that, hadn't really won consistently, to make that kind of a leap is a pretty big step. Like that's honestly, like I think the expectation this year is that the Magic would just kind of prove that they can be a 500 team or around a 500 team for a full 82 game season. That it wouldn't just be that, significant, but smaller sample size, 57 games. But the thing is, everything that the Magic on top of this were the last team eliminated from the Eastern Conference playoffs last year. They, the Pacers, went down before them. The Magic were the last team that had a chance to get in. And I'll grant you, they never got closer than 3 games in that. So there's definitely a hump that they needed to get over. But in those final 57 games last year, the Magic were 6th in the league in defensive rating. So from December 7th to the end of the season, the Magic were a top 10 defensive team. They have taken that into overdrive this year. They're 4th right now after a couple bad performances over the last week, but they are very clearly at least a top 10 defense if they maintain things this year. They're probably going to end up being a top 5 defense. And when you look at young teams, typically that's the part they struggle with. That's the part that they can't figure out how to keep going. And the Magic have their weaknesses. I think there's a very good point that a lot of people are making is like, okay, now they got to prove they swept through the Amway Center, had a 6-game homestand, swept through that. That's hard to do. That doesn't happen very often. But they got to prove they can travel. They got to prove they can take it on the road, that they can defend at a high level on the road, which they've proven they can do. Actually, they got to prove they can score on the road, which has been the bigger struggle for them. They got to continue to prove themselves that, you don't have anything in this league until you prove it and prove it over and over and over again. It's about consistency. And so that's what young teams typically struggle with, but defense usually travels. Defense is usually consistent. Defense is usually the toughest thing to teach a young team. And that's the foundation for this group. And that's why it really feels like, the Magic probably aren't going to finish 2nd in the East, but it feels like they are a legitimate playoff team right now.
Yeah, that's the way I view it too. It's interesting. Whenever players come through Orlando, I usually am in the visiting locker room or the visiting press conferences, and you just hear all these coaches and players just rave about Jamal Mosley and Orlando's defense. And I remember Jaylen Brown last year. He was like, "This is a really tough team. They're so physical. They're so long. They make you work for everything." And you can just tell guys are annoyed or frustrated after having to play these guys because you work for everything, and there's always hands and limbs in the passing lanes, and it's a really tough team to match up against. But Mosley gets so much credit just because you mentioned him earlier. He has created this culture. He always talks about not only, kind of getting these guys to play great defense and the hustle plays and the effort, but also, how this team is very accountable to one another. And he's really kind of create like a family close-knit type bond amongst this team to the point that, Cole Anthony gets his extension and everyone goes out and celebrates. And, you don't see that on their team sometimes because they're all kind of fighting over the same salary cap money. It seems like everyone's rooting for each other. And it reminds me of some of these other young teams we've seen over the years that kind of come up together. And it almost feels like a college program where everyone's rooting for each other and really close. Can you kind of speak to the culture and just this defense and kind of what they've built or what Mosley's built?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we spoke to Jamal Mosley today after he won Coach of the Month, and he came up to the press gaggle, just kind of bowed his head and just was like dreading the question about him. Like he does not want anything to be about him. Whenever you ask him about his decisions or the work that he's done, he'll always say, I got to give credit to my coaching staff. They put these guys in a great position. That selflessness that Jamal Mosley displays, I think that's really the culture that this team's about. Like we were at practice on Monday and he's, doing on-court drills with Paolo Banchero. Like he's with Paolo running pick and rolls, fighting through screens from other coaches. And he comes to us dripping sweat. Players, that's who Jamal Mosley is. He was an assistant coach. He was a player development guy for 14 years before he became a head coach. He's, working with, I believe it was with Byron Scott and Mike Brown in Cleveland. He worked with Rick Carlisle, obviously, in Dallas. That's who he is at his core. And I think what's been really impressive about him is that emphasis on relationships, of getting to know guys, of working with guys, of giving them some individual attention as the head coach. that's kind of the center of this whole project. And so he gives a lot of himself to his team, and then they give a lot of themselves to each other. And I think that's such a big part of what's worked. I give Jamal Mosley a lot of credit. It's been a decade-long rebuild here in Orlando since Dwight Howard left. And, it's very clear the coaches that have worked here, and there's been few of them, whatever moments that worked, they all always had like a clear vision of what the team was going to be. And so not only is Mosley kind of putting the work in and putting the sweat equity in with his players in a lot of ways, he also has a very clear vision for what they want to be. And that starts with the defense. We talked about the length and how physical they play. That is who the Magic are. They haven't hidden from that, even when things were really bad early in his tenure, when they were too young to really know what they were doing. They were still working toward that. And I give Jamal, he won't take the credit, but I will give him a lot of the credit for having this clear vision of what the team's going to be and keeping the faith in this group that, hey, keep doing these things and it's going to all turn out okay. That vision is starting to come to fruition here.
One of the reasons that I've been so high on this core for the last year has been because there's not many teams out there that have two 6'10", 6'11" creators, guys that can create for themselves and others. Paolo and Franz are exactly that. And both of these guys just look so special. We knew that Paolo has this crazy upside and could be, eventually a superstar level player. I was admittedly not as high on Franz when he came out. I thought he'd be more like a defensive specialist, and he exceeded all my expectations. I've been so impressed with his development and what he's shown. I think both of these guys kind of playing in the World Cup was big for them and helped them with their confidence, and it's just really fun to see these guys continue to make huge strides. What are your thoughts on that duo and kind of the 1-2 punch that they can kind of become going forward?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's certainly something the Magic have never done. Like the Magic, typically when they built around the center. Shaq, Dwight. They had a little bit of T-Mac, but we didn't get to see him with Grant Hill. It's hard to figure out how do you make these two players who maybe play the same position like complement each other really well. And a lot of that starts with them and how selfless they are. I think a lot of people early in the season this year were really frustrated with Paolo. Because the scoring was down. And I was watching, and I was like, no. The problem is the scoring's all there. The problem is he's trying to be really unselfish. Like he's trying to move the ball a little bit. And, his assists are up to nearly, I think they're at 4.5 per game or around that mark. Turnovers are up a little bit too, because he's a second-year player. He's a 21-year-old trying to figure out how to play in the NBA. These are two young guys still figuring things out. And the fun part is they're figuring it out, but they still want to do right by the team. Typically, I know I've been obsessed with and thinking about a lot. Okay, how does Paolo become a star? And part of that is he's got to make some mistakes. He's got to figure out what a good shot is. He's got to figure out how to face double teams and beat those. And you're going to make mistakes when you're seeing those for the first time. But really what's kind of been fascinating to watch with him, especially, is his decision of how I become a star is I'm going to get everyone else involved. I'm going to show that I'm a great passer. The Magic, I know we have it on our list to talk about not having Markelle, but one of the things that's happened with Markelle Fultz out is the Magic have essentially run Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner as their point guards. And Wagner has the opposite problem where he's sometimes too passive. And so now he's trying to take more shots and figure out what a good shot is for him and how to set up his shots off the dribble a little bit more. There's still a lot of experimenting going on. And so, what ultimately I think works about this team as a whole is your two central players, Paolo and Franz. They don't have a position. Like they're forwards, but they're point guards. They're shooting guards now that Paolo is shooting the ball so well. Paolo can play some center in small ball lineups. What the Magic are going for, a lot of people talk about positional versatility. I think the Magic are going for skill versatility. They want guys who do things that are not typical for players of their size. Jalen Suggs plays at least 2 inches taller than he is because he's such a rabid defender. Paolo Banchero can play some point guard, or we're seeing him play some point forward, or whatever you want to call it. Franz can bring the ball up and initiate offense too. Cole Anthony is probably the best rebounding 6'3" guard in the league in a very, very long time. Like they have guys who just fill in wherever the team is needed. And that just is meant to keep defenses off balance. And obviously defensively, that means you can switch. You can do a bunch of different coverages to keep teams off balance and use your size and length and physicality to really make it hard to operate. And, the versatility that Paolo and Franz bring and their selflessness, honestly, is really at the heart of all that.
I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Prize Picks. If you haven't tried daily fantasy sports on Prize Picks, you're missing out. You pick 2 to 6 players and whether they'll score more or less points than their Prize Pick projection. If you're right, you win big. You can win 25 times your money on any entry. At Prize Picks, you aren't competing against other people, which might include experts and sharks. It's just you versus the projections. Prize Picks offers projections on virtually every sport: NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, soccer, WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, and more. You can mix and match players from different sports, so you could have Steph Curry and Patrick Mahomes in the same entry, for example. If you download Prize Picks today and use the promo code RUNNING, they'll double your deposit up to $100. That is the promo code RUNNING, and they will match your deposit up to $100. It takes 30 seconds or less to build a lineup. To show you how easy it is, I'm going to build an entry right now. All right, we're on Prize Picks. Let's go over to the NBA. Since this is an Orlando Magic episode, I'm going to go with Paolo Banchero. Let's go more than 19.5 points against Cleveland. And then let's go over to the NFL for our other pick here. I'm going to go more than 60.5 rushing plus receiving yards for Jaylen Warren against New England. Let's do a $20 entry, place entry. Boom, we're good to go. We're entered. Thanks to Prize Picks for sponsoring this episode. Use that promo code RUNNING and they will match your first deposit up to $100. That is the promo code RUNNING and they will match your first deposit. Let's get back to the interview with Phil. I think it's a perfect way to kind of build for today's NBA, though. It seems like it's going to fit really well in this modern NBA. You know, I think it's a great breakdown of kind of how it works. And we hear so much about like positionless basketball, but you're right, the skills are really important too. And I don't know, I think it's a great way to kind of build your team today. You mentioned Fultz being out. They also don't have Wendell Carter Jr. That's not really being talked about a whole lot when you look at this recent stretch. I mean, I think I tweeted something after the Nuggets win and then the Celtics win, or after the back-to-back wins. Like, how many teams could be down 2 starters and beat 2 of the best teams in the NBA? It's really impressive, and it shows. I mean, it's a testament to their depth and the other guys stepping up, obviously. But what do you make of the fact that they're doing this without those 2 guys? And how much better can this team be when they are at full strength?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think it's a testament to their depth. The Magic have not always been the deepest team, and I think part of their success this year is they have 10, 11, maybe 12 guys that they are very comfortable playing and could fit into any lineup. And honestly, I think one thing that they've done really well is, it's kind of the old Spurs model where, guys out, you don't disrupt the rotation. So, they bring in, Cole Anthony off the bench, Mo Wagner, who's just been a scoring revelation. They have Jonathan Isaac, who, is an ace defender off the bench and kind of locks you down. Joe Ingles is just a quintessential veteran that just knows what he's doing. And so I think that depth is something that a lot of teams don't have. I think the Magic lead the league in bench scoring this year. And so that's been kind of a superpower for this team. Like, the starters, are good. Like, they're still a positive net rating, but they really, in years past, those second and fourth quarters are where the Magic kind of lost the plot a little bit because, either they were stretched too thin without injuries or they were relying on some younger players. Now they come in, they bring in a lot of guys that know what they're doing and really maximize and maximize those minutes and maximize those roles. But obviously there's so many ways this team can get better. Goga Bitadze has been a fantastic option at center. He's a great defender. We knew that coming into the season. But he and Anthony Black really don't give you much offensively. The Magic's whole goal, I think, with their starting group right now is let's establish what we're going to be able to do defensively. Let's really lock down defensively. And as we start to filter in some of the bench players, that's when we start hitting the offensive overdrive because we've already set the tone defensively. And, Anthony Black and Goga Bitadze have done a great job of that, but they don't really give you much offensively. So you add in a Wendell Carter, he can be a hub. Talk about skill versatility. He's a better passer than I think people give him credit for. Is he like Nikola Jokic good? No one is. But he's a better passer and certainly a great screener in a lot of ways. And he can stretch out to 3-point line and he can dive to the rim. He just gives you another way to attack. And obviously this is, despite how well the Magic played offensively lately, this is still an offensively challenged team. Markelle Fultz is another guy that can just kind of subvert the defense a little bit where he, you play him to drive, but he still takes the space that you give him and he can squeeze the ball into tight corners when he gets there. It's just another guy who has an offensive mind that is trying to score, and that is something the Magic are missing right now. We've seen some slippage lately with that starting group, so certainly the Magic can get a lot better, and obviously everyone now has an eye on April a little bit and thinking about, okay, what are we going to need to do to beat a defense that knows everything we're trying to do? That's kind of what the Magic are starting to prepare for, and obviously you need kind of all hands on deck for that.
I feel bad for Markel because I remember at media day he was saying this is my first off season I've had where I've been completely healthy. He's like, the best is yet to come. I'm gonna have a breakout year, and then he gets injured. So, but I've been impressed with him throughout his time in Orlando. He's become a pest on defense where just like Jalen Suggs and some of these other guys, like he's willing to pick up opponents full court and get his hand in the passing lanes, and he's really stepped up defensively. And then I think his confidence seems better too. He's pulling up from mid range. He's attempting threes, which we obviously hadn't seen before that. It seems like he's making strides, and like eventually, I know a lot of people think of Markel, they think about the Philly stint, and maybe they haven't watched him in a while, but he's had some really interesting strides. I think once he comes back, he could be a really key piece for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people forget that part. This year he struggled a little bit. Like the 3-pointer hasn't been there. He's been a little more hesitant to take threes. He's dealing with left knee tendonitis right now in the knee that required ACL surgery a couple of years ago. So I think there's just a lot of caution. They've been bringing him back slowly. There's very little you can do with tendonitis other than let the inflammation go down. So it's just like a kind of got to throw your hands up and just let his body take care of himself. But really, I look at Markel's season from the All-Star break to the end of the season last year, which is about a year after he came back from surgery. And what I've always been told about ACL injuries is it takes almost a full year to get back on the court and then almost a full year to regain where you were before the injury. But you look at his numbers from the All-Star break to the end of the season, he was averaging like 15.5 points per game, 6.5 assists per game. He was shooting those pull-up threes. He looked explosive. Like people forget, Markel Fultz was just a dynamic finisher at the rim, just an explosive dunker. He had a lot of just crazy plays. He's a really creative finisher. He has great touch in the mid-range. He's an excellent mid-range jump shooter, especially off the dribble, which I think probably just eases pressure off his shoulder, which is the thoracic outlet syndrome doesn't go away. You just manage it. So there is definitely an eagerness to see Markel get back to that level, and obviously health. Your best ability is availability, and health has been the biggest issue with him. But, I think people still really underestimate what Markel Fultz can provide this team.
Yeah, and I think last year when he was out, obviously that's when they had the really poor stretch at the beginning of the year. He was part of that group that was out. But I think this year, the fact that Jalen Suggs has stepped up, the fact that you have Anthony Black, it's made things a little bit easier. But what are your thoughts on that backcourt? Because there's been a lot of talk. Once Anthony Black got drafted, there was talk of, okay, who's the odd man out? You can't have Fultz, Suggs, Anthony, and Black. And I think there was even a quote, I want to say Anthony Black talked to Yahoo or something like that, and he had said something along the lines of, they had told my camp they're going to make a trade, or there was some kind of comment about the backcourt's going to change and it's not going to be everyone here. So I think, I know during the offseason, a lot of Magic fans were wondering, is there going to be a move? Kind of what's next? And also, a lot of these guys, Anthony, Markel, Jalen, they're very similar. So I think the thought was, do they need to go out and find someone that can provide more spacing or more of a complementary type guard or a different piece altogether? Not a guard, obviously, but move one of the guards for more complementary piece and some spacing. What are your thoughts on that backcourt situation? And do you think they will stick with all these guys, or could you see them making a move?
Yeah, it's definitely a big question. And I think, I remember looking at that draft and thinking, Anthony Black was not the perfect fit. There are other needs on the roster that would have guaranteed maybe a path to playing time and filled more immediate needs. I was big on, well, you can't trust Jonathan Isaac to play. That's no one's fault. That's just how it is. You need to cover for yourself there. You need to cover for, Wendell Carter's ever played more than 67 games in a season in his career. So you need to be prepared for him to miss 15 to 20 games. And obviously he's missed however many games he's missed now. It's getting up there. Like it's getting into that 15, 20 mark that I feared. So there are definitely a lot of more immediate needs than the backcourt. However, I still think when you're drafting that high in the draft, you got to take the best player available. You still got to take your guy. And, Black very much fits what the Magic believe in and their philosophies about things. Look, he's I know he isn't putting up the crazy numbers that you want to see from top rookies. And I'm not here saying he's a top one of the best rookies in the league right now. but he's a very good defender. You know, the Magic have put him on Luka Doncic at times. They put him on Zach LaVine at times, and he holds his own. So he's already a very advanced defender, and that obviously fits their MO and what they want. But at the end of the day, I think part of that draft philosophy and part of the team building philosophy was the Magic weren't sure how far along in the process they were. You know, at the end of the day, when you're still kind of in rebuilding mode, you think, let's just get talent. We can figure out where everything fits later. Now, sitting at 14-6, second in the Eastern Conference through the first quarter of the season, you know, regardless of where the Magic finish at this point, like we could clearly see this is a playoff team. So the Magic I think, need to start thinking about, okay, what do we actually need to fit around our key guys? And I think that is a fair question to ask. The Magic with their guard situation, you know, you look at Jalen Suggs. Like Jalen Suggs has turned himself into a nice shooter, but his value is he is the heart and soul of this team's defense. If you watch any Magic game, if you have not watched the Magic at all this season, take a moment during whatever game you're watching, whether it's, you know, Wednesday against Cleveland, maybe Friday against Detroit isn't the best example. Wednesday against Cleveland, next Monday against Cleveland. They play the Celtics next weekend. Just watch Jalen Suggs on defense for a few possessions and just see how hard that dude works and how much his energy like radiates out to everyone. Like if you would have asked, you know, I would have told you before the season, like this was a make or break season for Jalen Suggs. If he wants to be part of this team's future, he's got to prove himself. I would probably sit here and tell you like Jalen Suggs is about as untouchable as any player, you know, outside of Paolo and Franz. Jalen Suggs might be as untouchable as anyone on the roster. That's how important he's become. The Magic obviously just re-upped Cole Anthony off his rookie contract for 3 more years. And so it does feel like there has to be an odd man out. It does feel like the Magic need to add some shooting to that starting lineup. You know, we're going to find out in the playoffs just how much the Magic's poor shooting or like lack of 3-point attempts in general is going to could end up hurting them. And so it does feel like, especially with the injury now, that Markelle Fultz might be the odd man out. He's a free agent this summer. And so just the reality of the contracts is that, you know, I think this is a question that has to be asked. And I think it's a question that Markelle Fultz deserves the opportunity to answer before you make any final decisions. Like I'm not anticipating the Magic doing anything crazy at the trade deadline. Just because I think they like this group. They want to let this group grow. They want to let this group figure things out, kind of have this season for them before they start tinkering and saying, okay, like, this is our baseline. We're the 6th seed. We lost in 5 games or 6 games. How do we get to the next level? Like, I think they want to see they want to see and evaluate everything before they start tinkering and moving pieces around. But they got to ask themselves, is it Markelle Fultz, who is a reluctant 3-point shooter, who's not defended as a 3-point shooter? Is that the right point guard to maximize what you have in 2 potential all-stars in Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner? That is a fair question to ask. And I think that's why at this point, it feels like Markelle might be the odd man out. But like I said, I think he has earned the equity and earned the opportunity to prove that he can or cannot be without anyone making decisions for him.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that's the big thing that I've been saying since last year. Just like the spacing and 3-point shooting is going to be the most important thing. How do you find that? We saw they signed Joe Ingles in the offseason, but he really hasn't been shooting a lot. He's been more of like a facilitator, coach on the floor type guy. You know, I think a lot of Magic fans heard the name Ingles and thought, oh, he's going to be putting up a bunch of threes per game and it's going to, you know, provide that spacing. And he still does, you know, teams worry about him as a shooter because he's Joe Ingles, but the shooting really hasn't been there as much. You know, really it's been Gary Harris and, you know, Cole Anthony and you know, you mentioned Jalen Suggs at times.
Yeah. It's gonna be interesting. This is something I'm kind of watching and a question I'm you know, hoping to answer, but like Paolo Banchero, we're 20 games into the season. Paolo Banchero is shooting 43% from 3. Jalen Suggs is up at 37%. Like, they're still defended as if they're not shooters. And so at some point, defenses are going to adjust or defenses are going to get burned enough times to say, we got to worry about those guys from beyond the arc. We got to give them a little bit of gravity. But honestly, like the bigger issue for the Magic is they're not a 3-point shooting team at all. Like their percentage is low, which is fine. But they also don't take very many threes. I think they're at like 20. They were at 31 per game last year. I think that was 27th in the league. They're at like 28, 29, 30 this year. And I really thought they needed to bump that up to about 35 to help make up some of the 3-point math. They get away with it. And they know they're not a 3-point shooting team, so they're not necessarily hunting those threes, but it's really tough in this modern, like, sped up NBA not to be a team that's a threat from 3-point line. And especially when we get to the playoffs, that's going to be a problem. If you watch a lot of Magic games, they're probably zoned more than any team in the league. And they do okay against the zone, but they still go through droughts where, like, they can't shoot over. They can't break that zone down because no one's afraid of their shooting. So there's at least 5 feet in the paint at all times. And that's tough for them.
So last question for you. Where do you see this Magic team going from here? I had Evan Sidery on the show recently, and he was like, could we see Orlando cash in some of their assets for a Zach LaVine? And I was like, I really don't think they're going to look to do anything like that. There was the rumor in the offseason they made a call about Damian Lillard, but I think they like this core, like you said. I can't imagine they're going to make any moves. If anything, they'd make moves in the fringes, probably trying to add a shooter or, a role player, guys like that. You also have 2 lottery picks. We mentioned Anthony Black, but also Jet Howard, who's kind of waiting in the wings and, hasn't really gotten much of an opportunity yet. I can't see this being a team that just, cashes in a bunch of chips for a piece going forward. But when you look at kind of this team going forward, whether it's just internal development or, giving this group time or, again, making some moves on the fringes, what are your thoughts on kind of what we can expect from them rest of season and then in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think for the rest of the season, their goal is going to be to kind of maintain the core group. Like, I know Hoops Hype had the thing about some teams put some calls into for Chuma Okeke, who's out of the rotation. They didn't pick up the last year on his rookie contract. He's probably on the way. He's probably on the way out. Like I think that's pretty easy to see. Maybe the biggest thing they do is a Gary Harris trade. He's on the last year of his deal. He's kind of struggling with the shot. Getting him out of the rotation might free up some time for Jet Howard. But the way I've kind of always approached the trade deadline this year, regardless of where the Magic were in the standings, is I don't see Orlando making a move to quote unquote save the season. Like, conceptually, when the season started, I was like, okay, they're going to be fighting for the 9 or 10 spot. They're going to be fighting for a play-in spot. They're not going to go out and just make a move to make sure they get the 9-10 spot. They're going to do something that's going to help the team long-term. At the end of the day, they're still in a long-term project trying to figure out, okay, how do we get to the championship? Like that's where they're trying to go. And ultimately, the only way they're going to figure out what they need is to make the playoffs. They need to, like, I've been joking with people, they need to go face Milwaukee in the first round of a playoff series and lose in 5 games, not get swept. I don't want that, but they need to get into a playoff series, even now, like get into a 4-5 series with the Knicks or the Cavs and really figure out what you need. And the way I've been kind of telling people this is the Magic are at the stage where they don't know what they need quite yet. Yes, they need shooting. We all know, like, the obvious stuff is obvious, but yeah, they don't quite know how far along Paolo and Franz are. And frankly, Paolo, Banchero and Franz Wagner are really the only 2 players that are that important. Like, they're the superstar players. They're the guys you're building around. They need to know what they need to work on. They don't even know how good they are. They don't even know what they need to be better at. And the only way they're going to learn, and the only way the Magic are going to learn what they need, is to get into a playoff series and have those flaws exposed. A playoff series, especially against veteran coaches, against veteran teams, expose your every flaw. That's the beauty of the playoffs. And the Magic are at a developmental stage where they just need to experience that pressure, and they need to be able to go into the offseason saying, okay, this is why we lost our playoff series. Is this something we can fix internally, or is this something we have to go externally to get? And so, there may be a move to add a veteran shooter at the trade deadline. That wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't expect anything big. This is not a Magic team that's going to make a huge splash on the trade market this year. They have all the pieces to do so in the very near future, but I don't think the Magic are ready to push all their chips into the table. I think they're ready and willing to slow play this and let their young stars show them the way and show them what they need. And that's ultimately what they need to see this season.
Yeah, very well said. I also think you look at Paolo and Franz and Cole and Jalen, this group is so mature too for their age. Like I feel like those guys would take what they learned from a playoff series and really go work their butts off in the offseason. And like they have the drive and the determination and the maturity to like really put their head down and learn some valuable lessons from that too. You know, there's some guys out there that maybe wouldn't be able to do that or have as many takeaways. But every time I've been like around Paolo or some of these guys, I've just been really blown away by not only like his physical, he's a beast physically.
He's bigger than you think he is.
It's crazy when you stand next to him.
You always feel like I remember like scouting him in college, and I was just like, he's a big dude. And then the first time I saw him, I was like, oh, like he's a big dude. Like
I hate to like make the comparison, but like it's like the first time you stand next to LeBron, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is like a different that person. How is that a human and I'm a human? Like like it's great. Like he's crazy, but then also like the maturity mentally and just like talking to him and just he really gets it. So sometimes you would think about a group this young. I really think they would be able to take away a lot from a playoff series and put the work in the offseason, especially with the coaches and the supporting staff they have and everything too.
I tell Magic fans this all the time, like, and this is a very Magic specific reference. So for a national audience, you may not like get this. Like Dwight Howard was a beast in the playoffs for the Orlando Magic for several years. If you go back and look at his first playoff series in 2007, he averaged, I think it was 13 points, 9 rebounds per game in a 4-game sweep to the Pistons. Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace beat him up. And I don't think Dwight becomes the player, the superstar player that he would become without getting beat up a little bit in those playoffs, without like understanding like, oh, the playoffs are a different animal. And like, there are plenty of players who have been successful, obviously, early on and in their first playoff stints. So that's not an everyone experience, but a lot of players struggle that first playoff series, and it teaches them a lot. It teaches them that this is a different animal and that it requires a different level of preparation, a different level of seriousness, and that everyone knows what you're going to do at that point. And so you have to be able to figure out a way to, I say this about playoffs all the time. The playoffs are about beating a team that knows exactly what you're trying to do and knows it forwards and backwards. And the great teams know how to beat that. That's why they're great. And so that's something that young teams especially don't understand. Like the playoff book is a thing. And the first time you get it, like I remember in 2019, hearing like Evan Fournier and Nikola Vucevic and Aaron Gordon talk about the Steve Clifford playoff book. And they were like, whoa, like, what is this thing? And it's just like, oh no, that's the detail you need for this series. Like it's that important. It's that different.
One of the things on this show, I always talk about like continuity, chemistry, some of like the most undervalued things in sports, but like playoff experience is up there too. Just the confidence that comes from, being a playoff team and getting that experience, learning how to win and also just kind of getting a taste for the postseason too and understanding what it's like to kind of have that and then know, okay, we need to focus our entire season about getting to that point and going deep on a playoff run. It's like the most important thing for a young team. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I think you're around this team more than anyone. So I had to bring you on to talk about them. And pretty much every day, right? You're basically part of the family at this point.
I've been in the mud for a little bit with this team. I've seen some things.
Well, you do a fantastic job. Tell everyone where they can find more of your work.
Yeah, the best place to find my work is at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. So you can follow the site there at OMagicDaily. That's where I tweet a lot of my kind of in-game analysis. You can follow my personal account at PhilipRR_OMD. And of course, check out my podcast. I'm the host of Locked On Magic. That's your daily Orlando Magic podcast. So if you ever want to pop in and see how the Magic are doing, I'm usually talking something there every day, Monday through Friday at least.
There you go. And again, if you're a national fan or a fan of a different team, just throw a Magic game on League Pass. Watch them when you can. They are so much fun. Like I'm telling you, I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, yeah, I really watch the Magic, and then I'll recommend them and they're like, they're my new League Pass team. I'm checking them out as much as I can. So they're a fun team and it's just a really, really cool group to watch. And it's a great storyline too. I mean, like Phil said earlier, it's always fun watching a young team kind of come into their own, and especially one that plays such a fun brand of basketball. So definitely check them out. And if you guys want to check out more episodes of Running Up the Score, we air them every Tuesday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch on Twitter or X. You can watch on YouTube. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And until next time,